For today's story, we are talking about a 911 dispatcher who's being charged with manslaughter for not sending an ambulance in response to a 911 call. So this is a pretty interesting just all around because you don't see this kind of thing happening. You don't really see public officials being charged with any crimes relating to their official duties, particularly where the crime in question is not doing something. So here, a 911 operator did not send an ambulance. As a result, we're saying someone died. So we want to charge them with this basis. So this is a weird one, at least in terms of you don't see this every day. So let's discuss what the facts appear to be. A Pennsylvania 911 operator faces a rare charge of involuntary manslaughter by not doing something, namely by failing to send an ambulance to the rural home of a woman who died of internal bleeding a day later, despite a plea from the woman's daughter that without medical help, she was going to die. A Greene County detective last week filed charges against Leon Price, 50, in the death of Diane Kronek, 54, based on the reluctance of dispatch to help without getting more assurance they'd actually go to the hospital. I believe she'd actually be alive today if they would have sent an ambulance, said the daughter, 38. Well, I bet you believe that. Price, who's also charged with reckless endangerment, official oppression, and obstruction, questioned repeatedly during the 4-minute call about whether they would actually be taken for treatment. Price was arraigned on June the 29th and released on bail. He did not reply to messages left in his name. Officials say defense lawyer has not contacted the district court. Okay, here's apparently some quotes about this thing. It has to be very clear throughout the entire state that when you call 911, it's not going to be conditioned on someone on the other end of the phone saying if there's going to be a service provider or not. What we're trying to do here is make sure this never happens again. In the 911 recording, an operator identified by police as Price replied to the description of her mother as needing hospital treatment by asking if she was willing to go to the hospital about a half hour away from where she was living in Sycamore. She will be because I'm on my way there, so she's going or she's going to die, we told Price, apparently. Price said she would send an ambulance, but then added, we really need to make sure that she's willing to go. She's going to go, she's going to go, because if not, she's going to die, there's nothing else. She said that Kronk was not thinking clearly and that her mother was her closest relation. When Price asked again if Kronk would in fact go, she responded, okay, well, can we just try? After they told Price she was 10 minutes from her mother's home, Price asked if they call 911 back once they made sure that she was willing to go in an ambulance. I'm sorry, she said, and Price responded, no, don't be sorry, ma'am. Just call me when you get there, okay? When Tritchnell and her 3 children arrived at the home, she said the person was nude on their front porch and talking incoherently. She got her mother to put on a robe. She just kept saying that she was okay, she's fine. She's the mom, you know, she doesn't listen to her children. She said that she could not call from her home because her mother's landline could not be located and there was not cell service. She also did not call on the way to the home, believing her uncle would soon check on her and have contact with 911. This is unheard of to me. I mean, they send an ambulance for anything, which I think is part of the 911 officer's issues. We'll get there. And here I'm telling this guy my mom's going to die. It's like death, and he doesn't get an ambulance. Yeah, I bet the 911 operators hear a lot of shit, though. Her brother found it the next day morning and died. Let's try to parse this out as best we can, because I think this is an interesting case on a lot of different levels, and maybe it'll turn out to be less interesting once things develop. But I think the 911 operator, at least in part, is frustrated because the 911 operator has to deal with a lot of basically very false calls and has to deal with calls of people claiming things that are a lot worse than they are simply because they know it will get a 911 dispatch. And 911 has to be careful about its resources. It's triage in some sense, right? It's like, okay, we as 911 are going to dispatch resources based on different levels of immediacy, for example, and seriousness, right? We need to triage our 911 resources because, you know, there's limited resources and we can't send everything everywhere. I know from talking with people that 911 gets a lot of shit calls, and a lot of people call 911 for a lot of reasons that seem decidedly less than emergencies. So it's not hard to believe that the 911 operator is becoming a bit jaded by some of this stuff. And they're saying, oh, she's going to die, and might be thinking to themselves, maybe this isn't a real call. Perhaps because this might not be her first time with this particular person. Maybe it's informed by their interactions with this particular person. So there's a boy who cries wolf problem. And so it's like, well, I'm not going to send the 911 vehicle unless she's willing to go, because she has the ability to refuse service, right? Everyone has the ability to refuse medical care as long as they're conscious. So if you send 911 to me and I'm like, go away, 911 can't touch me, right? Only if I'm not responding, then maybe, but I have the right to refuse medical care. So like, if this person is not going to accept the medical care, then maybe our resources are better spent elsewhere. So it's like, if you're not committing to that, then like, we're wasting our time and our resources. Now, whether or not the 911 operator should be in a position to make that decision or not, right? That's a question that goes to a policy consideration. But at least I can sort of understand why she might be making that decision, even if she shouldn't be empowered to make that decision, right? Why it might make sense from her point of view. So like, her liability under the law is one thing, and I think is really, really interesting, because as we pointed out, this is really, really rare. We want to charge her with manslaughter for something she didn't do, right? And the only way that works as a legal theory is because she has an affirmative duty. And she signed up to be a 911 operator, so she has some duties by law, but like, does what she's doing make any sense in vis-a-vis those duties or not? I think could be really interesting for the defense. It could also be very, very interesting, especially if she has interactions with this particular person, which again, any 911 operator will tell you that they have frequent flyers that they can set watches by. So like, it might be a very well-informed skepticism that this is not what it purports to be. So it's basically boy who cried wolf syndrome taken into criminal law. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops for sure. Let's read some more. The prosecutor said that he's investigating whether there's any policy or training under which they're allowed to refuse services to callers. So if there is any sort of policy, training, or discretion at all in this, then her defense looks a lot better. If there is no discretion or training or whatever, she just made it up out of nowhere, her case is harder, but not necessarily like impossible. We all deserve equal protection. We all deserve access to medical services. The problem is the resources themselves are limited. So they have to be apportioned out by some level of importance and urgency. I have major concern as the safety and community with this. Yeah, maybe the 911 operator shouldn't be allowed to make those calls. Maybe they literally should not be allowed to make that decision, despite whatever skepticisms and concerns they have. Maybe they should just hit the dispatch, even if it means that, we're dispatching an ambulance who is now no longer available to potentially take care of a more serious thing. So we're going to send an ambulance to take care of fakey McFake cases, even though it might mean that we're no longer available to take care of a child who might need more immediate care because we no longer have the resources. So, sending out these 911 calls is not free in every possible sense, including at the expense of people's lives, because those resources are now no longer available to someone who might now really need them. John Kelly, a lawyer who's general counsel to the National Emergency Number Association, said criminal charges for failing to send help are very rare. In a case Kelly teaches in dispatcher training, a 911 operator in Detroit received a year of probation and lost a job after authorities said they did not take seriously a boy's call to report his mother had collapsed. The 5-year-old boy testified the dispatcher accused him of playing games and hung up, while dispatcher said that she could not hear the child. On behalf of the mother's estate, they're suing Price and the county in federal court. So this is a 1983 violation. 1983 seems like a bad legal theory. I don't know that we can sue, right? Because it's deprivation of, we're trying to sue under 42 USC 1983. You guys know how hard that is, right? Like, clearly established. You don't have it fails at step one. It fails at step one. You don't have a constitutional right to medical care. So like, her sending, so you're going to try to squeeze this into equal protection. If she discriminated against you because of your race, like, I'm not doing it because you're black, or I'm not doing it because you're a woman. If she did it because of a protected class, yeah. If she just did it because you think she's a liar, though, it's not an equal protection violation, because now we're discriminating on reasons that are different than a protected reason. So like, trying to squeeze this into a 1983 lawsuit seems borderline impossible, whatever criminal liability there might be under state law. The lawsuit accuses them of callous refusal of public emergency services. Yeah, but as a constitutional matter, you're not entitled to them, right? So it doesn't really work. Marie Jones, a lawyer for the county and 911 supervisors in the federal case, say her clients plan to vigorously defend the lawsuit. I think as the lawsuit, you're there. Like, you can't, there's no basis for it. She said there is personal matter ongoing, but declined to elaborate. It's unfortunate the woman died. Certainly, from a personal standpoint, that's very difficult. Yeah, but if you're going to try to sue in federal court under 1983, you're going to have to prove deprivation of constitutional rights that are clearly established from someone not doing a thing that you're not entitled to in the first place as a matter of constitutional law. Trying to squeeze us into equal protection is like, yeah, that's tough unless you can prove she did it because of race, because of gender, because of some sort of protected reason. If she just did it because she didn't believe him, it's not an equal protection violation. The woman had told the 911 dispatcher the mother had been drinking heavily for some weeks before she died and noticed she was losing weight and turning yellow. She said an autopsy concluded that the person who worked in home health care died of internal bleeding. She says she thinks about her late mother every day, about how the former longtime sub-manager loved to cook to help people and spoil her 5 grandchildren. She had the biggest heart. If someone didn't have a place to live, she was going to take them to bed, and that was mom. Well, whether or not mom is a good person or not is irrelevant as to the 911 care. I mean, in terms of fundamental principles, right? Like, either she has a right or she doesn't. The fact that she's a good person or not is neither here nor there. So this is an interesting article and something we're going to have to follow because it raises all kinds of... So this is an interesting article and something we're going to have to follow because it raises all kinds of interesting questions about legal duty under state law, the degree to which she had any discretion or judgment, either as a matter of law or training or practice, or whether or not other people have engaged in use of discretion, even if it's not a formal policy, like they know. Like, that people engage in not doing this occasionally and no one gets reprimanded, so it basically becomes a policy, de facto policy. There's a whole lot of room, there's a whole lot of reasons to go. And like, if she's not doing it recklessly, if she's doing it based on information, perhaps as to this specific person who died, then maybe there's a boy who cried wolf factor. So it's not, you know, it's interesting also because you don't see these cases every day. So there is some sort of issue about why in particular this person is being charged. So yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things here. I don't know how this will end, and I'm not even sure on a policy level how I feel it should end. Right. So whether or not there should be a prosecution here, whether this is a good use of resources in terms of prosecution. So it's a whole interesting case. And as it develops, we'll try to follow it. But that brings us to the end of the discussion for the moment. Thank you so much for being part of the Uncivil Law family. If you enjoyed this legal education content, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. We appreciate your continuing support. Until later, my friends, cheers and goodbye.